Alright guys, so in this video we're going to look at scatterplots. Scatterplots are going to be different than my line graphs because they're not going to be connected by a line. Scatterplots are going to be just that, a scattering of plots. There's going to be some dots on the line, no specific line trying to connect them all. So here you've got 3 examples of scatterplots. One of them has kind of some background information. It's quiz scores. The other 2 are just random scatterplots that I found online. So you can see how there's just dots all over the place. Now we want to describe them in a certain way. So we want to say if they're positive, negative, no correlation. And then with that, we want to introduce this idea of trend lines. So you can see down here below, trend lines is a line that closely fits the data. And then something that I added in there, meaning when you draw your trend line, you have about the same number of dots on the top and on the bottom. And so the trend line does want to follow the data, but then that's going to give us a picture of the data on this specific line. So this says, draw a trend line for the examples above. Well, this first example, these dots are everywhere. I could not draw a line up or down to correspond with this. So these we're going to learn here in a bit. This has no trend because there's no real rhyme or reason to the dots. They almost seem very random. Versus something like this, all of them are gradually going in the same direction. And so this trend line is going to look something like this. Notice that it follows. I've got some dots above, some dots below. I'm not going to get out a ruler and count the dots above and below and make sure your line is straight. I'm not going to do all that. I'm just looking for, does your line closely follow the data? Something that would not be considered a trend line would be this. This, I've got way more dots on top than bottom. And so that one would be marked wrong. But something like this would be pretty close to a good trend line. And then over here, these kind of look random, but they are gradually going downhill ever so slightly. And so that would be a good picture of a trend line. Mine may be able to slope a little bit more downhill, but it kind of follows the dots. So let's look at what that means specifically. So with our scatter plots, we have 3 types of correlations. The first one you'll see over here on the left, this is going to be a positive correlation, and a positive correlation is going to go genuinely uphill. So the graph is, if I was walking on the graph from left to right, I would be going gradually uphill. We call these direct relation. So as one is increasing, the other is increasing. So an example would be years experience versus salary. Typically, especially in education, the longer that you are at a school, the more money you make at the end of the year. We have what's called a step system. So each year you get a little bit of a raise. So that would be a direct relation. As the number of years increases, so does your salary. That would be a positive or a direct relation correlation. The other one we have, essentially, if we have a positive one, then we're going to have a negative one. So the negative correlations, these are going to be gradually going downhill. So if I'm walking on the graph from left to right, I would be walking downhill. These we call inversely related because as one increases, the other is going to decrease. And so hours of sleep versus cups of coffee. At least in my case, the less sleep I get, so the decrease in hours of sleep, the increase in cups of coffee I drink. And then the last one, it is possible to have no correlation. No correlation, the dots are going to seem completely random and all over the place. Your math to 12th grade versus your shoe size. Those don't say anything about each other. You could have a very high Math 212 grade and a very high shoe size. Same way you could have a high Math 212 grade and a very low shoe size. So they are not correlated. So then it says, look back at the scatter plots on the previous page, so the ones that we did at the very beginning, and identify them as no correlation, positive or negative. So this first one we says was completely random, so that's going to be an example of no correlation. The second one is genuinely going uphill, and so that's going to be an example of a positive correlation. And the third one, the trend line is going downhill, or the points are going downhill. So that's going to be an example of a negative correlation. Now, in terms of the trend lines, we are just looking for a very broad overview. Remember, we're trying to keep this in the context of Math 212 in your future career. Here's a textbook page from a Pearson book. This actually came out of your textbook that just shows students how to model with lines. Here they've got the trend line in there modeled, and then we're going to look at how to actually write those trend lines based off of the data points. And so I've got a quick graphing review here for you. However, I've got another video that reviews graphing from chapter 8, just in case you've forgotten it, to kind of bring it back. And then it also brings it back from your early algebra days. And so we're going to pick up in the next video with graphing. I would recommend, if you're having a hard time with graphing, writing the equations, before you watch the next video, go back to the graphing review, which you'll see it on that 212 playlist.